Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Country Education Partnership Free Professional Development Autumn Series. My name is Brendan Ryan. The Country Education Partnership acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connection to land, water and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. Today is the first of our 2025 professional development programs. It's the first in the autumn series. There's a series of 4 programs, of which today our topic is self-regulation, and we will continue over the next 4 weeks in the delivery of these programs. It's now my pleasure to introduce the Chief Executive Officer of the Country Education Partnership, Mark McVeigh, to provide an update regarding CEP activities and also a personal welcome. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Brendan. On behalf of CEP, yes, welcome to the first episode in this year's series, which is very exciting with the quality of speakers we have not only today but planned for the year ahead. So thank you, Brendan. Only one key item from CEP today, and that's to promote our dinner and rural education forum that we have coming up in just over 2 weeks' time. There's still time to register in our Bush Voices publication that comes out on Friday. There'll be an opportunity to register there, but also through our website. The dinner looks like an exciting night with an amazing speaker from a former Northern Territorian school principal. Morris might have a giggle there at the connection, but and we also have an amazing young singer from Mansfield who's going to entertain us on the evening. And Friday looms to be a brilliant session as well. We'll hear from the New Zealand Rural Schools Leadership Association, as well as representative from the University of Canberra around the latest research in rural education, and from the Education Department around early childhood provision, but also international staffing, just what's happening in that space and how that works. And I was just talking to a principal a minute ago who's interviewing from someone from South Africa as we speak. So just a measure there to try and address the staffing crisis in rural Victoria. So that's our most exciting happening that's coming up very soon, Brendan, that I wanted to promote. So back to you for today's session.
Thanks very much, Mark. As usual, the session today will take exactly 1 hour, so we will conclude by 5 p.m. The program is being recorded, so there will be an opportunity to review the session at your convenience, and past sessions are also available online. If you have a question during the session, please include that in the chat box. We will endeavour to keep an eye on the chat box and respond to those questions during the course of today's program. And towards the end of the program, there will be a survey available in the chat box area, and we do ask all participants to complete the survey before signing off. It's very important for CEP to get some feedback on the conduct of the session. So now I'll hand over to the CEP manager, Morris Billy, who will introduce our guests and facilitate today's discussion. Over to you, Morris.
Thanks, Brendan, and hello everybody, and welcome to our new autumn series for 2025. We kick it off with a bang today. We've got 2 extremely special people to share their stories and journeys with us today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of them. Greg Robson will be with us shortly, and he currently finds himself in the recent cyclone area of Queensland, so it'll be interesting to see his story of how he's navigated that and how that fits in with all his ideas around self-regulation and techniques for managing different scenarios. So Greg, no pressure, but we'll come to you shortly. But first up, we're so privileged to have Tracey Ezard with us today. Tracey is a speaker, an author, an educator. She was awarded the Breakthrough Speaker of the Year in 2023 by the Professional Speakers of Australia, and awarded the Headley Bear Educator of the Year in 2022 by the Victorian branch of the Australian Council of Education Leaders. Now, they all have acronyms. I won't repeat them, but it's exciting to have Tracey with us. Just reading a bit of background about Tracey, she does believe in stretching yourself and getting outside your comfort zone. I read that she's tried a bit of stand-up comedy in a pub. I'm not sure if she's going to bring that into today's session. She's run a bar on an island. She likes jumping out of planes, or does she? And she's even tried tap dancing, which could lead you to the typical old joke, but I won't. So she tried that as an adult. So a lot of stuff there. She's also a well-known author. She's the author of The Buzz, which is her recent publication, Creating a Thriving and Collaborative Staff Learning and Culture, and written specifically for leaders in the education sector. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Tracey and hand it over to you, Tracey, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Morris. Can I just throw that back? It is a huge privilege to be on here because I consider everyone that's on the line, you are on the ground doing the hard yards. And what I hope is to just give you some things that you can go and take and use and integrate and embed. And so it is a real privilege to be here. I've been lucky enough over the years to work with Brendan when I've come up and done leadership stuff up at Horsham. Greg and I also go way back up the Northern Territory. I see myself as a pattern detector, and it's something that I've always done. My first book, it's actually my first book, The Buzz, Morris. It's now 10 years old. I've been doing this for 20 years, and The Buzz came out when we knew that collaborative cultures were actually the way, that going in and working in your little silo in the classroom wasn't actually getting the best outcomes for students, and that when we learnt deeply together, then all of a sudden we brought our collective genius together. And so I've always been really fascinated by that. And, I call it the buzz is when we have a real energy around the collective. And what we do is we stretch each other, and we really are willing to come out and be vulnerable and courageous together. Now, all of you that are here today will know that that's no easy feat, that when we're talking about educators coming together, support staff coming together, there is a whole sense of lack of trust, perhaps, lack of willingness to be vulnerable together, because does that mean that people will think I won't do my job very well? And so the buzz is all about how do we create the mindset, the environment and the dialogue to actually do that hard work. Part of the thing that we will give you out of today is you can get the download of the buzz, and it's as an ebook, and you are more than welcome to send that on to all your teams. This is a really useful playbook for all, like your learning specialists, the people that lead those conversations around teaching and learning, yourself, your teams. So that's there as a resource for you. My last book is Ferocious Warmth. So that came out in 2021, and I know some of you will be familiar with that. I'd like to talk a little bit about that in the terms of self-regulation today, because over the time that I've worked with leaders and been a leader myself, the patterns of being able to balance the head and the heart have just come through time and time again. The ability to be cognitive, but also have this great emotional intelligence to bring together. And to be able to do that, how do we actually have self-regulation so that through the complex times we can actually manage to access both and access those things that maybe are not our forte. For some people, having deep empathy for people is something they have to work on, and that's the reality. For others, working strategically and really thinking that big picture and what are the big milestones we need to work on, what's the action plan, that's the work that we need to develop. And so it really comes back to that self-awareness. So I'd like to explore that, but I'd also like to share, I'm writing a new book. Morris mentioned that. I'm writing a new book this year, and it's on how do we elevate the buzz even further? How do we, in this complex time of staff shortages, increased needs of students, complexity in the world in general, a push to polarity rather than actually working together, how do we push against that? And I call it having cultures of anti-fragility. And I'd like to sort of just share with you this term now. So Maddie will just pin that for you so you can see it. And this anti-fragile term comes from Nassim Taleb, who has written some really interesting books around systems, and his approach to anti-fragile is this one, that as systems, entities and phenomenon get exposed to complexity and stress and shock, they actually grow stronger. And I think that's absolutely what we're trying all the time to achieve in education, because we know that those students walk in that door every day with different things that are going on for them, let alone the external context we live in. So how do we create cultures that really help us do that? And so I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by schools that can push through beyond resilience and move to anti-fragile. So if you think of, resilience is often, think of a bouncing ball, it bounces and it comes back up to where it was. Anti-fragile is the bounce of the ball bounces us higher, and we get stronger because of the complexity. First off, I would love to call on this partnership, the CEP crew that are here and beyond watching it later, is, do you have one of those cultures where you've been able to push through just getting by, where you've been able to push through the let's work together and collaborate, but let's work together and collectively step into challenge with excitement and connectivity? Because they're the ones I think that we should look to and say, what is it you're doing? What is it you're doing to be able to create that? Here are some of the things that I know are absolutely in place to help to create that. And one is courage. And I think this is our work, to challenge the status quo for our students' sake and not defend it for our comfort's sake. And that every adult in a school and in a community is connected around this common purpose, to challenge the status quos that are not working. What are the ones that we really need to go, we need to do this differently? And I know that you will be having these conversations daily with your teams, with students around going, how do we do this differently to make sure that it is working for the students in our schools, but also the staff in our schools in a really complex time that we're living in. The other thing that goes with it is a ferocious warmth terminology, and that is being expansive. And being expansive is all about expanding our own model of the world, being willing to get out of our comfort zone. You might not need to throw yourself out of a plane. You might not need to jump on a stand-up comedy stage like I did to really experience it. But how do we get out of our day-to-day and really look to pushing our boundaries around the way we see that education should be into what could it be, and how are we stepping into that? And so I think the challenge for us then is, how are we as leaders able to support ourselves to be self-regulated, to take on that courage, to take on that willingness to challenge the status quo, to front up every day, inspiring people to think differently. And so that's where ferocious warmth comes from. It's the combination of the head and the heart, and the ability to be able to pull from the head and the heart depending on the context. So that head and heart example, sorry, I'm clicking the wrong thing. That head and heart example is, some of us will have great strengths in the cognitive area. Some of us will have great strengths in the heart area. And I bet over the years, you've developed strengths from both. And so when we step into what does the context need, we bring together both the results and the relationships. And it was a principle in Townsville in Queensland that for me, that concept really popped, where I saw her being able to hold high challenge for her staff, high challenge and high expectation for those beautiful students that she had in a very, very complex environment, high transition. But she did it with this huge amount of warmth and empathy that connected her to every student, every educator, every support staff, and every community member because of the way that she interacted with them. And it was really amazing to see her being able to do that. And I just find her so inspiring. And I'm wondering, if we can just pause for a minute here, whether I can just throw to you, Brendan, Mark, Greg, Morris, if he's around, can you identify in your careers leaders in specifically who could balance that results and that relationship, the culture and the strategy, high quality relationships, not at the expense of high quality results. And I'm not talking about high academic achievement. I'm talking about we are always aiming to do the very best for our students so they can be the very best they can be. But they got that balance right. Has anyone got an example they could give us?
I think that's a really good point that you make, Tracey. And I was thinking just from my own perspective, having spent some time in schools where there might be a difference of opinion from the same people observing the same thing, but coming away with slightly different takeaways from that. I have worked in a school where, and I thought that the majority of people were inspired and really loved what the leader and the leadership team were doing in terms of stretching themselves and actually role modeling that courageous nature that you talked about. But from the flip side of that, there's always a small percentage of people who might challenge it as well and say, well, that's not our core business. Our core business is to educate and to make sure that the students are in class and that. So it's probably the courage to stick with what you believe in when the challenges appear at different levels while you're still navigating that pathway. And that's probably my observation in that space. If you're strong enough to stick with it, it'll come through, but don't be shaken when there's a few, negativity comes from a few bits and pieces.
Absolutely. I love that. I reckon that's really spot on, Morris, around what I've seen as well. And that it comes back to, I think, who are we as leaders? What's our identity as leaders? And what are our core values that we sit on? And that's something, again, that I've seen really clearly when Ferocious Warmth leaders have come into a school and been very transparent about their belief in human beings and the belief in the potential of human beings, and that relationships are critical, and that does not take away from boundaries and structure and certainty. Now, I'm working with a principal at the moment, and he's come into a new school where chaos was reigning, absolute chaos was reigning. And what he said about doing was building the relationships, as Leonie has absolutely put in the chat box, building those relationships. But at the same time, what he did is he pulled in a bit of tightness and structure around things that were just being let go. And the teachers were thanking him so much for actually pulling the reins in. So lifting the expectation, but at the same time, absolutely building relationships at the same time. So that, for me, is the essence of Ferocious Warmth there. And it is absolutely, as Leonie says, it's the balance being just right around that. So, yeah. Greg, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Just my headspace over the years is similar when you've talked about the head and the heart. I've always talked about the leadership management. I used to call it a linear thing, that you can be a great leader, you can be a great manager, and they're sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum, but the true leader is the person who can do both and flip between them when it's needed.
Absolutely.
Because leadership's about letting people do the right thing and empowering the staff to make their own journeys. Management's about ensuring the school's functionality, and when we just talked about that, when Morris talked about that principal, Tracey, that's just gone into a dysfunctional school, what the staff were looking for right then was management. Let's fix it. Let's get the rules in place. Let's create the orderly environment. But they also still need the leadership to go that next direction. So I like the head and heart as well, though. Yeah.
Yep. Well, the head and the heart is the way to, just easily frame that, I think. And I think we're so busy that sometimes we need some really easy, sticky messages. And for Ferocious Warmth, it's really about where is it that I sit contextually around this. So what does this context need? Does it need? It will always need, I have a real strong belief, it always needs the heart. It always needs that emotional intelligence. I don't think we should ever lift the bar, put in expectations without actually having care and compassion for people. Does that mean I'm a pushover? No, it does not. But does it mean I care for you? Absolutely. And, things like when people leave a school is a great example, I think, of what sort of culture and ferocious warmth they've had. Are they able to create a space where they let people go with love? So when people don't fit anymore, do they let them go with love? And do those people feel, have we been able to maintain a really good professional relationship right until the day I leave the door? And, we know that can't always happen. Like, I'd be in La La Land if I said that always was going to happen. But I think it really reflects on the quality of our relationship. So that drawing from both sides, is what ferocious warmth is all about. And the thing that I'd really love to just draw to as we talk about self-regulation, and you talk more about that with Greg, is our self-awareness is critical. So I think that leadership self-awareness is a leadership attribute. And unfortunately, research would show that about 95% of us think that we're self-aware, but that the research would show that only about 10 to 15% of us are. And so that ability to be able to step in and have self-awareness is something I think we're always working on. I think doing things like reading books that get you thinking about your deeper heart. This is available. You can download parts of this. You can get this on Audible. Get in touch with me. I can give you mini books of it if you don't want to buy the whole thing or whatever it is. But there are so many good podcasts that you can listen to that help us really build our self-awareness around our head and our heart. Because if we don't, what happens is people get the extremes of it. And this is what the extremes look like that I've seen in leaders, and I'm sure you have been. It's people that can't do the blend of the head and the heart. And what they get instead is people get default, either too many results, just our leadership team, all we are around results, outcomes, the milestones, the management stuff, and we miss the people. Or we go too much into relationships. We let things slide. We let our boundaries slide. People haven't got certainty. We haven't got clarity. We think we're being kind, but actually we're being so unclear that people just don't know where they stand. And so if we're not self-regulated, we actually get into our default and we're not aware that we're missing the other side in the blend. The extremities of that are really dangerous. So I call the extremity of the head the fearsome leader. And I'm sure we've all experienced fearsome leaders in our time. The fearsome leader is the toxic leadership. It's the dark leadership, bullying leadership, narcissistic leadership. It's the autocratic leadership that says, shut up, just do what I say. I don't care what you think. It's the one that inflicts trauma because the way that people are spoken to elicits no psychological safety and creates fear. And unfortunately, we have too much of that goes on in general in people's workplaces. I think in a lot of schools, we have done so much work around building leadership that when the fearsome leader comes up, it's actually when we're not self-regulated, we're exhausted, we're tired, we're so overwhelmed with all the things we've got to do, and we haven't been looking after ourselves. I think that's when sometimes we pop into fearsome leadership. And that's where we then might go home and we then might ruminate overnight around how I talk to that person, and we go into what I call the enmeshed leader. And the enmeshed leader is so in the heart that the rescuer comes up, we try to fix things in a really unhealthy way. Our boundaries are shot. We ask people to step up and people just laugh at us because we're good mates and we've never really made the journey into the leadership level. Mm-hmm. So this space of being out of regulation really impacts our leadership. And, I know we're sort of coming to the end of the time where I'm thinking about this, but I would love you to just have that reflection around when you're at your best. I bet you're in the middle. I bet you're pulling from the head and the heart, contextually adaptable. When we are out of balance, what can come up is instead of our strengths, people get our shadows. And instead of being great empathetic leaders, we're avoiding the harder conversations. Instead of being great strategic leaders, we're just going to our office, closing the door, not letting anyone in, and making edicts from on high. And people have just got to do it. We're not getting out in the classroom. We're not visible. And so that sense of self, that being able to understand what do I need to be able to support myself, I think is really critical. Being really well open and aware, fully self-aware, is where we are really logically and creatively and with our heart reflecting on ourselves. When we're in our default, our awareness starts either going to just what do I see myself as, or what does other people think of me? That need to be liked can come up. And when we're at our extremes, I think our self-awareness goes right down. People they can't even get to us. We're just not even open to feedback around things. And the thing that links to it is also our well-being. So well-being is a leadership behaviour, folks. We know that in our heads. Our work is to put that into our hearts and our bodies to actually do it. And it's not about just getting to the gym. It might be about going and buying yourself a beautiful bunch of flowers because it brings you joy. It might be about going and teaching that science class because you love teaching science, or going sitting on the grade 1 floor and just having some really great fun with the students when they're doing some really interesting stuff. How is it that you're looking after yourself so that your well-being is embedded? You catch up with your mates. It's in your diary. You don't leave it. You make time to get out and plant things in your garden because you love your garden. Whatever your joy bubbles are, you do them. And you don't deprioritise it, because that's when our defaults come up. That's when we go to the comfort stuff and we don't stretch our skills. And that's absolutely when we can, if we ignore it, what people experience is, instead of our beautiful regulated selves, they get our unregulated self. So I hope that just giving you a bit of a really quick snapshot around ferocious warmth helps, because I think that's the leadership we need. We need people to lead transformation, but we also so need to connect and inspire people to come with us and do it with us.
I think you've given us so much to think about, Tracey, and I was just thinking about that word courage and how it can have a number of different definitions when people are using it, but particularly in the leadership space. And sometimes I think about, and it sort of touches on my point before, sometimes the courage not to do anything is also important, because you are getting messages left, right and centre from different people with different interests, and to stay the course and stay courageous and just say, no, I'm going to focus on this and I'm not going to let those things in. But I also think that well-being point you made was really critical. The courage to also look after each other and to speak up and find out if your colleagues and your leadership team and the people around you are doing okay, and how you can check in with them and how you can make sure that they are doing some things for themselves, and how you can do little things for them in this world where, our educators are so busy and have got so many things on their plate. Often those things, unfortunately, can drop down the list, but they are most critical in these challenging times.
Absolutely agree with you. And we are really good often at telling other people to look after ourselves. And it often comes at a cost. And I share stories in Ferocious Warmth, a story about, 10 years ago being involved in a really massive motorbike accident, where we lost some friends, and we were there. And then what happened in the fallout of my life, because what I did was overfunction. I just looked after everyone else. And then a few years down the track, the cracks that came up for me around that. And then, 18 months ago, I had triple bypass open heart surgery because I had 3 blocked arteries in my heart. Who knew? And so that was pretty massive. But I was in such a better space because I had prioritised the things that I knew I needed to be able to do the complex work I do. And who knew that my arteries were laying down plaque since I was 20? It was genetic. Who knew that? I didn't. And was I healthy before? Yep. Am I much healthier now? Yes. But what I had put in place was all these things to say, I'm not going to deprioritise myself, because I actually want to be the best for my family. I want to be the best for the people I work for, and I want to be the best for myself. And do I fall down on that? Yeah. Do I stuff it up? Yep. Do I get stressed? Yep. But what I do is give myself self-compassion to say, what do I need to do to make sure I'm in the best space?
Yeah, 100%. Fantastic conversation. We're still in the window for some questions, and without putting pressure on anybody, I'm keen to hear. We've got a few principals in the or ex-principals in the chat here, and I'm wondering if they wanted to share their experience in this space or make any comment of what you're talking about in the relevance of their roles in those leadership roles. Mark, did you want to say anything at this point? Because I know you've certainly been principal at a few schools in your time. Does it resonate with you?
Yeah, and happy if other principals want to jump in.
Absolutely.
What I just thought about, Morris, was a situation at a school, a low socioeconomic school, had its challenges, and we just discovered after a while that Mondays were quite difficult when students come back from perhaps being with the other parent over the weekend. There was just some challenges, and Mondays were really hard. But staff meetings had been Monday nights for like 30 years. And I think it was me or one of us at the end just said, why can't we meet Tuesdays or Tuesday, Wednesday? So we just got rid of Monday night meetings, and it made Mondays a lot easier to deal with. It was the obvious thing right in front of us, but no one saw it because tradition got in the way. And just a simple little thing that we brought in, and then
I love it. That's for me they're the small, important, challenging the status quo stuff. Because just because we've always done it that way, why should we? And you know, the simplicity of that can be pretty amazing when people go, gee, that little tweak's just made all the difference, hasn't it? Yeah. It's what good responsive teaching is, isn't it? Like, I'm going to make a tweak here. That student just got it because I did that tweak. It's just leveling that up. So
yeah. I think we've got Greg. Greg, you want to make a comment?
I just appreciated, Mark, what you said. I was also in a school, similar issues, similar things on Monday morning, and there was a lot of negativity about the breakfast program, which was offered for Indigenous students, and we just changed the school. On a Monday morning, breakfast was for everyone, because a lot of our families, the food ran out on the weekend, all those complexities, and we started school with breakfast. So when the bell hit 8:15, we actually spent the first 45 minutes in the assembly area all together having breakfast and just rebuilding those connections so that kids felt safe, they felt self-regulated, they were calm, they were fed, and they went into class. Same sort of thing.
It's a beautiful example, isn't it, of the head and the heart. You know, that's a pragmatic reason to do it. But what comes out of that, the ripples of that, is community, you know, connection. And so the heart stuff, you know, some people would have come with it with a different lens and gone, okay, what we want to do is build community. So how are we going to do it? And one of the outcomes is, wow, it's easier from a management perspective as well. So thinking from those two lenses just gives us such great insight rather than just coming from the, you know, what are the outcomes we're after? Actually, what's the surprising outcomes we get?
We had our oppositions. You know, we had the school registrar who was saying, we can't afford this all year. Look at the figures. How are we going to do this? How are we going to fund this? And we just went, let's just start it. And then we found over the year the money we saved on dealing with those behaviours, dealing with the broken equipment, dealing with everything. When we actually scored it out, it was well worth every cent.
Huge.
I think, Brendan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I'm interested in, Tracey, in the idea of connectedness. CEP deals with a lot of small schools, and my observation has been since COVID, there seems to be a reduction in that connectedness between schools for various reasons, and I think partly the system structure has created that tension. But what's your observation concerning the importance of networking? If somebody wants to be expansive and push the boundaries, I think it's critical to be able to gather a team around you, but it doesn't necessarily mean the team at the school. I think it's the team that's local in terms of the network.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And it might not also be local as well. I think local is really important for, you know, people that are in more isolated areas, that you've got that squad. I call them squads. But even those ones, this is where I think COVID gave us this opportunity to say, actually, if we do this well, we can connect online. and make use of that. But I think that also, I have a particular view of networking that is around, we're not going to get everything we need from the one group of people. And so how do we the expansive is, how do I expand my network? So for example, me running my own practice for 20 years, I have a group of education people that we catch up with, but actually my main mentor group is women that run businesses in all different realms, and the thinking I get from that is huge. And then I have another squad of people who are the people that through COVID, we laughed and we cried when our businesses disappeared, and then we looked at what do we need to learn to make it work online. So for me, it really is that I think we need to look at what is it that I need, but also what am I willing to give? Because community and networks don't work unless there's absolutely that feed in and feed out. The buzz diagnostic that I do, that anyone in the CEP schools can do that. It's a cultural diagnostic. It's had over 600 schools do it. Over 15,000 people go through it. Gives you a really good benchmark on where your teams see your culture. I've used it to great effect in regional and remote schools where, people go, oh, that's how we see ourselves. What do we need to do to work better together? So that's really powerful. So anyone can just get in contact with me and we can set it up for you to do it. But one thing I found after COVID, to your point there, Brendan, was there's a question in there of we share our practices with other schools. And during COVID and after COVID, that took a nosedive. Because in a lot of places, networks were really getting really strong. And then through COVID, we just went, oh, geez, we just have to look after ourselves here because, oh, my goodness, this is tough. And so I think we are coming out of it. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you find works, Brendan, around that space?
In my opinion, I think the system needs to encourage that connectedness. That there's an authentic connection between the schools, and we've already spoken about some of the regulation and the focus on results and accountability, which can be overwhelming. And I do think that at times, of recent times, some of the schools have unfortunately become a little bit isolated because of that overwhelming nature of what's been expected of them. And it's more important than ever before to get together and work together whether it's a cluster or a network, but feed off each other and get each other's ideas, and therefore you can push the boundaries.
Yeah. I worked with a network earlier this year. I've worked with networks over many years, and the ones that actually take the time to say, what do we all want to get out of this and need to get out of this to be able to thrive, they're the ones that, and they revisit that. They're the ones that absolutely are thriving. I think the ones that, you just come together and maybe someone's cobbled together an agenda, or maybe the system leader has, it's all system stuff and it's not actually the human beings in the room stuff as much. I reckon we've got to push back around that and say, actually, let's co-create this together and have that dialogue.
Thanks, Tracey. Thanks, Brendan, for your interactions there as well. Encourage people, if you've still got questions, we should have a bit of time towards the end. If there's any questions, pop them in the chat box or we'll come to you. I just noted that, Leonie did make a comment in the chat box, which I think follows through with what you were saying around Leonie worked in an Aboriginal community for the last decade, and the experience which gave her the best opportunity there was the capacity to learn active listening. We talk about listening a lot. We don't often have the right opportunities to share with people how you can actively listen and take information on board. It's just presumed that we can, and we all know people who say that they listen and perhaps only hear what they want to hear and stuff. So thanks for that, Leonie, because that's a really good comment, and it's given you a lot of insight into that community that you worked with, and particularly when we work with vulnerable and marginalised communities, having time to just sit down and listen is so important. Greg, we'll bring you in now because you've had a bit of input so far, and we want to hear from you now. I know you've worked with the Northern Territory Department of Education. I know you've been a principal in AP. I know you're currently in Queensland and you've been in the flood area helping out there. So we're really keen to have you on board and to add to our conversation around self-regulation. So I'll hand over to you and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Today I was going to share the last 5 years of my career before I retired a few years ago. I had the absolute, it was an honour in the end, but I was basically shanghaied into becoming the director of an intervention centre, which was in crisis because there was some behaviour, there was high needs students from 0 to 12-year-old, the ones who schools don't know what to do, parents don't know what to do, the system doesn't know what to do. And the NT government at the time set up a wonderful place it was called Mimica, and it was an early years intervention centre. They put in a couple of autism classes, a FAFT, which was a parents as first teachers program. They put in speechies and OTs and a trauma unit, and all these things were collective groups from all sections of the department. And the idea was that it was going to be a quick service for schools and families, and when there was political pressure about, those kids who were getting suspended 12 times and they're in year 1 or they're in transition. The place was in crisis because of a few kids' behaviours, and I had to go in, and we talked earlier about set the ground rules and basically be the manager right at the start, be the manager of extreme behaviours. But as the time went on, we settled those fairly quickly. As the time went on, the collective group started to look at how can we run the professional learning in schools around those needs of those families that are the most at need. And so when Tracey just talked about networks, one of the things I found the most, I suppose it shook me at the time, but you think of, we're going to set up a network and we're going to do this and we'll have a 10-year plan and we'll have a 5-year plan. The networks that we found worked the most effective is when we actually put an endpoint to it. We said, okay, one group of schools were having all these issues, and we said, okay, let's look at the Berry Street Victoria model, which we're looking at about how to build relationships with these families and these students. And so we set up and funded a 12-month network. And we said, in 12 months, this network will finish. But here is what we want to try and achieve in that 12 months. So that was really creative. At the end, of course, the network didn't finish in 12 months, but it sort of, over the years, it changed into something else. So what I want to start with, I'll just see if my high-tech thing here works. Oh, it does. I lost all my files, by the way, in the last week or so. I wiped my Apple iCloud because I was a bit annoyed about the funding to America and after the elections and things. And the next day, my hard drive cracked. So I went, I've still got it all in Darwin, but I'm quite a way away from it. I put this up first because at Mimica, our only poster or our only thing we had when you walked in the front was that unconditional positive regard. And as a staff and as a team, whenever anything happened, in a school, when there was a crisis, whatever there was, the first thing we always tried to go back to is, yes, but we have unconditional positive regard for everyone. So I just put that there because I use that myself as a mantra or as something when in a team situation when there were issues. So I just get my lovely assistant, my wife, to swap the post around. She's my high technician support as well. So the thing I wanted to talk to today is about when those situations are in a school are really high needs, like you've got the student or the parent or someone has basically flipped their lid or lost control. Excuse me. So what I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about is just a very simple model. And I know in your schools you'll all have ways you deal with this, but I wanted to talk about reaching the learning brain. Has anyone seen this sort of thing before? You probably use it all the time, but don't recognize it. So when you go into a situation where you're regulating someone, or the first step is right at the bottom, is self-regulate. So you can see right at the bottom it says self-regulation. And I put that there because over the last few years I've been working in some special schools in Darwin and places like libraries where things can, surprisingly, libraries are places where young people can have extreme behaviour suddenly, and council support groups, youth groups and things like that. If you're moving into a situation where there is someone with a lack of self-regulation, you've got to be regulated yourself. And if you're not the right person at that time. So all I've got there is regulate, relate and reason. Excuse me. And I'll just go through how it works. If I was entering a classroom where students, I'll call him Billy, trash the room, whatever it is, the first thing you do is don't engage. You just sit, just regulate. Stay close to them, as close as you can. They're safe. Wait for the calm spate, the spot where the gap will happen. Oh, excuse me. And you'll know the point in time where they're ready for the relation. And that's when you talk about rebuilding that relationship. And Tracey, you were talking about the heart and the head. This is all about the heart. Don't say, oh my God, what happened here? Or why are you doing this? You actually say something like, how's your brother going in high school? He's, you know, to tag into the child's where they're at. Because if they're heightened and their vagus nerve is basically, they're in that small brain or dinosaur brain, they're not hearing anything regarding what went wrong, or the second you say, you know, why did you do this or why did you do that, they're not hearing that at all. They are hearing the relationship bit if you say something that's completely separate but getting them back into the room. And the reason, the top one being the reason, that's when you start talking about how are we going to make things better, what are we going to do to get you back in the school or to get you back in the classroom. If there are consequences, because we all have to have consequences for some things, try and keep them separate to the relationship rebuilding. So it might be, look, I'm afraid you have to go home for a couple of days because our school rules say this means this. But when you come back on Tuesday, here's what we're going to do to fix things up. It's really, that's the hardest bit for me to talk about, because personally I'd say suspensions or, you know, consequences are not the way. It's all about rebuilding the relationship, saying sorry, natural justice, restoring whatever happened. But I recognise that schools have to have consequential things because there's also the community behind them. So anyway, that's just one model I was just going to talk about. Anyone got any comments or questions? Silence.
Have you gone off?
No, I'm there. Okay. But to go back to the real reason about self-regulation and the school community is, the more time your staff, your parents, your students work on the language around relationships and the heart, the more easy any situation you're faced with can be engaged in, I suppose is the word I'm looking for. Yeah. All right. I think that's about it.
Greg, can I ask a question, and it just sort of ties in, and also Tracey, if you wanted to jump in. I was thinking about that concept of self-regulation, and the way you talked about it through, which makes so much sense. But I wonder about that concept when there's traumatic events going on and when there's chaos going on, and maybe is it different if you're just dealing with one student who's having a meltdown, as opposed in a community where everybody is traumatized and everybody's dealings. And we have seen you know, times when an entire school community has been traumatized and with dramatic events and stuff. And I wonder about the concept of self-regulation in that space, or is it something we just throw out the window at that time?
No, I think it's probably more critical at that stage as well.
And what does it look like?
To me, it's if you look at the physical, first of all, it's deep breathing, calmness before you take an action, and respond, don't react would be the three things I keep in my personal. So if you're in any situation where someone says something and it triggers you, you can't, you respond to it, don't react to it. It would be my point at the very base of it.
Tracey, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think self-regulation in traumatic times is absolutely where we all the work we've done at other times comes to the fore then, doesn't it, you know? Some of us are really great in traumatic times. So, you know, my partner's a former MICA paramedic, and I know when he was, you know, working with incredible complex things, he would say that he would go into like this slow mode, deep focus, where he could make life and death type of reactions because he was in that slow mode. But, you know, for a lot of us, we haven't got that as, you know, that's our daily, where, you know, they're unusual. So I think, first off, I totally agree with Greg. The breath is a very underrated way to self-regulate. The good old square breathing, and you know, that's one thing that I have certainly done when I've worked with teams that are really you can feel the trauma in the room. Is let's all just breathe together. And square breathing is simply the breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, and holding for 4. Now, it's often well known. It's not well used though. And when you have a group of people that actually just sit down and go, okay, we have got to deal with this right now. Let's take 1 minute to square breathe. What we do is we give our brains the access, instead of the cortisol that's flaring, we give our access to the oxytocin, the dopamine, the serotonin, and the cortisol settles down and our vagus nerve gets a chance to actually stop sending panic system to our prefrontal cortex. So, you know, that, and as well as it is incredibly connecting, just to sit down and go, let's just for 1 minute just breathe. And let's breathe together. And now let's step into it. You know, and the other thing is, you know, I know we're talking about quite traumatic things. I think we have to pull on the resources and the supports to get people who know what they're doing around traumatic times in to support us. Because you cannot be the person who solves everyone's problems and holds everyone's trauma. You know, beautiful Dr. Adam Fraser and his team are doing great work around vicarious trauma. And I think we need to really look at what are they finding, what are the strategies, and I know Adam's a really great supporter of CEP, and we'll be doing some more of this in the series, which is fantastic. But we need to learn from what do the experts tell us about what we need to just get really good at doing all the time, so that when really big events come up, they're just second nature. They're not something I've got to grab when I'm in panic.
Yeah. We're nearly out of time. We've probably got a quick minute if someone has a burning question or comment. Otherwise, we can sort of move on. Has anyone got anything that they'd like to add at this point? Because Tracey and Greg have given us so much to think about, but so many really useful tips and strategies and ideas and thought processes there. So, and there's quite a few good comments and things to go and follow up in the chat boxes as well. So, has anyone got anything that they wanted to share?
Morris, a question for Greg. Greg, in an intervention centre, obviously there's a lot of challenging situations. If someone came to you and asked for some advice on how to plan for challenging situations, what's 1 or 2 things that you could recommend? Okay.
The first thing I'd recommend in a school is common language, and build it when the things are going well, not when things are falling apart. So that if you had, like when I just did that regulate, relate, reason, as in the whole staff, you actually said, this is what we do in these situations. So if I turn to you in a crisis and say, we're regulating now, Brendan, you know, I'm telling you, don't engage verbally, just, or whatever the situation your school needs. If you have common language around what is happening right now, you don't have the people thinking, well, you're not doing anything. What are you doing? Just sitting. You're sitting there with a kid and you're colouring in, and the child's just, you know, destroyed the classroom. What's going on? We need action. If you have some common language around how we react to different situations and what steps we go through and models we go through, I think that's the best one. And also the same, I'd put the same also with how you respond people-wise. So in situations where at schools where I've worked, we talk about person 1, person 2, and person 3. So when there is a situation, person 1 is the only person talking to that child or that staff member or that parent. No one else, the other people in the room do not engage. Person number 2 is actually supporting person number 1. So they're just standing there close, ready to, could you get a drink of water, or come in closer if it does heighten. And person 3 is sort of the gatekeeper of the whole space to keep other kids, other teachers who want to come and help, other parents who try and engage in that crisis situation, to just say, just go away. So if you have those predefined terms of what's happening in the actual situation, if I turn around to you and said, you know, would you go away because we're trying to deal with something here, you might take offence. But if I say, I'm doing position 1, can you do position 3? We all have the common language, you understand what the process is and what's happening. So predetermined language would be my catchphrase.
That makes perfect sense, and it's a perfect takeaway from today's session. Those 3 dot points that you mentioned that can be taken away from this. So thank you, Tracey, and thank you, Greg. This has been fantastic, and it's been wonderful to get your insights. And without speaking on behalf of Mark, we would certainly love to get you both back, because I think that it opens up conversations for other topics further down the track. But we've just about run out of time, so thank you so much for being with us. Tracey, did you want to have a final comment?
I was just going to throw out to anyone watching it or anyone online, give yourself self-compassion tonight. What is it that you can do that just is totally for you, not for anyone else?
Yeah, excellent. And that's, everyone's walking away with that thought front of mind right now. So thank you for that prompt. And Brendan, without further ado, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Morris. Can I also thank Tracey and Greg? It's been a fabulous session. Mark, did you want to comment as well before we finish?
No, once again, just want to reiterate the thoughts and comments made. And yes, Greg and I have we worked together over 20 years ago, so it was this the first time we've actually sat down and probably professionally learnt from each other. So
thank you.
Very pleasurable session.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Tracey. And Greg, everybody that's contributed to today's session. Reminder that the poll is now in the chat box, so please complete the survey before you sign off today. We do really appreciate the feedback. It's available there, so please complete that. A reminder also that next week's session, next Wednesday, the second in the autumn series, the topics for consideration are alternative settings and challenges facing P12 schools. So that's a topic for the next session. So please link in next Wednesday. That'll be another terrific session. So thanks everybody for your contributions today. Sign off for now. Bye for now.